My name is Margaret Collins. I'm 76 years old, living in a small room in a nursing home in Ohio. The nurses treat me kindly, but I rarely get visitors. My kids have their own lives, their own families, and I know I'm fading into the background like so many others here, but I'm not here to complain. I need to share something I've kept locked inside for over 60 years, a story that's never left my mind, a truth I thought was better buried. But now, as I near the end, I can't take this with me. Maybe someone out there needs to hear it. I was 12 when they sold me, and I mean that literally. Sold. Back then, I lived with my mom and 2 younger brothers in a little town called Plainfield, Indiana. Our home was an old wooden shack with broken windows and a leaky roof. School was far, and I didn't always go because I had to watch my brothers while Mom worked. Her name was Carol, and I could see the weight of a hard life etched in her face. She cleaned houses, cared for the elderly, did whatever she could to scrape by. My dad, James, vanished when I was about 5, said he was going to work in another state, but we never heard from him again. So, everything fell on Mom. She was drowning. I remember that month. The electricity was cut off, and we were cooking on a makeshift fire with scavenged wood. Food was running out. Neighbors stopped lending us anything. That's when he showed up. His name was Richard Malone, a man my mom knew, much older than her. I didn't know much about him, just that he owned a farm in Ohio and lived alone since his wife died. He pulled up in a clean blue pickup truck, a stark contrast to our rundown life. He came with an offer of help, as he called it. Said he needed someone to look after his house, help in the kitchen, and he'd pay well. To us, it sounded like a fortune. I was on the porch, listening from a distance. At first I thought Mom would go with him. But then, mid-conversation, she turned and called me over. I thought she wanted me to fetch coffee or something. Instead, she looked at me with red-rimmed eyes and said I'd be going with Mr. Malone for a while, just until things got better. "He'll take care of you, Margaret," she said. "You'll have food, a warm bed. You'll be better off than here." I froze. I didn't fully grasp what was happening. All I remember is asking, "When will I come back?" She looked away. That was it. My bag was already packed. A small backpack with 2 changes of clothes, a pair of shoes, and a rag doll I'd sewn from scraps. Mr. Malone smiled, put a hand on my shoulder, and said I'd love his house. He led me to the truck and opened the door. As I climbed in, I looked back. Mom stood on the porch, holding my brothers. She wasn't crying. She didn't say a word. She just watched me, like she knew she'd made a choice she couldn't undo. The drive to Ohio took hours. I didn't speak. I just stared out the window, clutching my doll. When we arrived, the place was massive. An old house surrounded by endless cornfields. The front door creaked. The floors were dark wood, and everything smelled of mold and cigarettes. No one else was there. Just him and me. He showed me my room. It was small, with an iron bed and a thick blanket. A tiny window looked out to the fields, and that's where my childhood ended. At first, I just cleaned, washed clothes, swept floors, helped in the kitchen. But soon, he changed. He started demanding more, talking to me in a way that made me feel dirty. I didn't understand what was happening. I just knew I was scared, that it wasn't right, that no one was coming for me, that I had nowhere to run. I tried writing a letter to Mom, scribbling on a scrap of old notebook paper and begging the town post office to send it. I never got a reply. One day, Malone found one of my letters and tore it up in front of me. He said I didn't need those people anymore, that I was his now, and I believed him. Because at 12, you believe everything when fear is all you know. What he did to me over the years, I still can't bring myself to say in detail, but I survived. I waited. I stayed silent for so long, and it was only 40 years later that the worst happened. I'll get to that soon, because even now, thinking about it takes my breath away. That house became my world, a small, quiet, terrifying world. I stopped counting the days. All I knew was the sun rose, I woke up, cleaned, washed, cooked, and at night, locked myself in my room, praying he'd fall asleep. I avoided his eyes. I barely spoke. I was even afraid to cough. This went on for years. Back then, no one talked about abuse. I didn't even have a name for what I was going through. I just knew it was wrong. It hurt, and I wasn't free. By 14, I wasn't a child anymore. My body had changed, but inside, I was still a scared little girl. Richard, the man who bought me, started taking me to town, made me wear dresses that didn't feel like a girl's clothes, said I was too pretty to stay hidden, and I smiled, because if I didn't, I knew it'd be worse later. On one of those trips, I saw a girl my age in a shop window, laughing with her mom, picking out a colorful dress, eating ice cream. I realized I hadn't done anything like that in years. I hadn't played, hadn't talked with other girls, hadn't seen my family. That's when it hit me. I wasn't free, and maybe I never would be. At 16, I found the courage to ask to leave. I told him I'd helped enough, that I wanted to go home. He laughed, said my mom never wanted me back, that she sold me to feed one less mouth. He showed me a letter, one he wrote pretending to be her, saying I should stay quiet and obey, that everything was fine this way. He knew how to break you with words, and he broke me. By 18, I did everything in that house. Washed, cooked, sewed, tended to the pigs and chickens. I lived like a wife, but I wasn't, not on paper. He never registered me as anything. It was easier to keep me hidden that way. I had no documents, couldn't leave alone, didn't even have an ID. Over time, your body gets used to the exhaustion, but your mind never forgets. I spent years eating in silence, sleeping in silence, living in silence, until one day, something changed. I started feeling sick, dizzy. I thought it was the flu. It wasn't. I was pregnant. I was terrified. So terrified. I was young, knew nothing about motherhood, and what scared me most was picturing that child growing up in the same hell as me. But I had no choice. The baby grew inside me and was born on a cold November night, a boy. I named him William, after my grandfather, the only man I remembered fondly from childhood. William was the only light in that house. I cared for him with everything I had, protected him as best I could. Richard never hurt the boy directly, but he'd say he wasn't anyone's father, that the kid was just another burden, and one day he'd send him away. When William was 4, I started teaching him to hide. We made it a game. I'd say, "If you hear the truck, run to the closet." He thought it was fun, but it was to keep him safe. Time passed. When William was 7, I escaped with him. I waited for a night when Richard was drunk, grabbed some hidden cash, put William on a bus, and we left in the middle of the night. We ended up in Cincinnati. There, I found a church that helped women in tough situations. I slept in a shelter with other moms, told half my story, and got new documents. Fake ones, but enough to start over. In the years that followed, I worked as a cleaner, a cook, anything I could. I raised William alone. I never got involved with anyone else. I was too afraid of any man who raised his voice, afraid to trust. My son grew up seeing my struggles, but never knew the full story. I told him his dad had abandoned us. It was easier that way, and maybe, in a way, it was true. William graduated, became an engineer, got married, had kids. I became a grandmother. For a while, I felt alive again. Despite the scars, despite the past burning inside me, I smiled again. I thought the worst was behind me. I was wrong. 40 years after I fled that farm, life hit me again. And this time, it was in a way I never could have imagined, something that shattered everything I'd spent a lifetime building. It started on an ordinary morning. I was on my son's porch, sipping lukewarm coffee, watching my grandkids play in the yard. I felt at peace. William had invited me to stay with them for a few days. His wife, Emily, was polite, but a bit distant. The boys, Ethan and Caleb, were full of energy, running around the grass. They reminded me of a childhood I never had. Up until that moment, I thought I'd won, that the past was gone. But that day, William came home early from work, looking serious. He handed me an envelope and said, "This came for you, Mom. It's got your name, but no sender." I was confused. Hardly anyone knew where I was. My hands shook as I opened it, and my heart stopped. Inside was an old photo of the house where I'd been held for years, Richard Malone's house in Ohio, and with it, a handwritten note. "The truth is alive, and it won't stay silent." I stood up fast, my stomach churning. I ran to the bathroom and threw up. William knocked, worried, but I said it was just something I ate. It wasn't. That note kept me awake for nights. I started looking over my shoulder, checking if someone was following me, suspecting everything. Who knew my story? Who sent this? I hadn't told anyone about the farm, not even my son, and now it was coming back, like a ghost knocking at my door. 2 days later, I got an anonymous call, a calm, firm, male voice. "Margaret Collins, right? I know what happened in Liberty Hill. I know who Richard was, and I know what you left behind." I stayed silent. He went on, "There are more people involved than you think, and one of them is close to your family now." Before I could respond, the call dropped. I tried calling back, but it was a private number. My heart was racing. Who was this man? How did he know the name of the town where the farm was? And what did he mean by close to your family? I started paying closer attention. piecing things together. I noticed one of William's business partners at his firm had the same last name as Richard, Malone, a young man named Andrew Malone. I looked him up online and found he was the grandson of an Ohio farmer. The connection was possible. His family could be tied to what happened to me, or to other girls like me. But that wasn't all. One night, while William and Emily were out for a business dinner, I stayed home with the boys. Caleb, the youngest, found an old box of photos in the basement and wanted to show me. We looked through them together. Pictures of William's childhood, his graduation, his wedding. Then Caleb pulled out a yellowed folder. Inside, I found something that took my breath away. It was a copy of William's birth certificate. And in the father field, it read, Richard J. Malone. I froze. It didn't make sense. I'd never listed a father for William. I didn't even know if Richard had my documents, let alone that he'd do this. My hands were sweaty as I stared at the paper. The signature at the bottom looked familiar. It was his. He'd registered my son as his own, maybe to control us, maybe to leave a trace, maybe because he knew one day it would come back. I hid the certificate and went to my room, locked the door, sat on the bed with the paper in my lap, and started crying. Not from sadness. It was something else. It was like everything I'd built had been tainted. My son carried the name of the man who destroyed my youth, and I'd never known, never imagined. The next day, I went to the city records office and requested the original birth certificate. It was all true. Richard Malone had forged my signature and listed himself as William's father. And the strangest part, 2 months after the registration, he died. A tractor accident, according to the file. I felt nothing reading that. Not anger, not relief, just emptiness. I went back home and didn't tell anyone, but something inside me had shifted. The past was more present than ever, and I knew this was just the beginning. There was more coming, and the worst was still to come, because days later, someone knocked on my son's door. It was the man from the phone call, and this time he brought documents, photos, and a name I never thought I'd hear again. I was in the living room when he arrived. He wasn't an ordinary man. He wore a dark coat, carried a briefcase, and spoke calmly, like he knew I was expecting him. William opened the door, confused, and asked who he was. The man introduced himself as David Reynolds, a retired investigator. He said he was writing a book about old crimes in rural Ohio, and that my name had come up more than once. William looked at me, expecting an explanation, but I just said I wanted to talk to Mr. Reynolds alone. We sat on the porch. The wind was cold, and I was shivering. But not just from the weather, it was fear. Fear of what he knew. Fear of what he might show me. David opened his briefcase and laid out some photos on the table. They were old, mostly black and white. In one, I recognized myself, sitting on the wooden bench on the farm's porch. Behind me stood Richard Malone, holding a glass and smiling. I was about 13 in that picture. His smile always gave me chills. This photo was taken by one of the men who worked on the farm. He disappeared months later, David said. We found out other girls were in that house before and after you, Margaret, and not all of them made it out alive. I swallowed hard. He showed more documents, reports, police complaints, accusations that were never investigated. Richard's name was in several of them. But he had protection, David said. Influential people, even police covered for him. That's why he was never arrested. That's why he kept doing what he did for so long. Then he said something that broke me. One of those girls, named Lisa, had a son while she was in that house. That boy was adopted by a family in Indiana. His last name is Malone, but there's no direct link to Richard on paper, only through DNA. I asked why he was telling me this now. He answered calmly, because we think that adopted boy is the same Andrew Malone who works with your son. And we think he's found out about the past. He knows about you, and he might want some kind of justice or revenge. I was stunned. I'd already suspected the coincidence, but hearing it out loud made it so much worse. David went on. He's not trying to hurt you, Margaret, but he wants answers, and you might be the only one still alive who can give them. After he left, I sat there for a long time, staring at the cloudy sky. My head was spinning. How could this all be coming back after so many years? How could lives torn apart by violence and pain be crossing paths again, by pure chance? That night, I didn't sleep. I kept thinking about what to do. Tell William? What if he turned against me? What if he thought I'd hidden it all on purpose? But keeping it secret any longer didn't feel right either. I'd spent my life staying silent, and silence hadn't protected me. It only made me sick. The next morning, I called William to talk. We sat in the kitchen. I asked him not to interrupt, and I started from the beginning. I told him everything: the sale, the farm, The years of abuse, escaping with him in my arms, starting over in Cincinnati, the fake name, the birth certificate, the fear, the nights in hiding, the guilt, and now the past coming back through a man who might be his blood brother. William listened. He stayed quiet for a while. Then he got up, left the kitchen, and went to his room. I thought he wouldn't come back, but an hour later, he did. His eyes red. He hugged me and said, "You never should have gone through any of that. I'm so sorry you had to carry it alone." I cried on his shoulder. For the first time, I felt understood, and still, the worst was yet to come. 2 days later, a note was slipped under the door. "Meet me at the old barn on the farm, Saturday at 3 p.m. Just you, Andrew." My heart raced. I didn't know if I should go, but something inside me said this meeting had to happen, that it might close a cycle that started when I was a child. On Saturday, I took a bus alone to Liberty Hill. I got off a few blocks from the dirt road leading to the farm. Everything was older, drier, more forgotten, but the barn was still there. I walked in slowly, the smell of old wood, dust, and time hitting me. And there he was, Andrew, tall, serious, with the same dark eyes as Richard, but there was something different about him. He didn't carry malice, just pain. "You're Margaret?" he asked. I nodded. "You knew my mother?" I took a deep breath. Not just knew her. For a while I was her. Andrew fell silent after I said that. He looked at me like he was still trying to piece it all together. The light streaming through the barn's slats hit his face, and for a moment I saw Richard. Not the older Richard who kept me trapped, but the younger one from the early days, when he pretended to be trustworthy. The resemblance was eerie. The sharp jawline, deep-set eyes, the way he tilted his head when listening. "So, you're my mother?" he asked, his voice soft, almost pleading. I took a deep breath. "Not biologically, but I know how you feel. I was left behind too. I grew up with questions no one answered." He ran a hand through his hair and paced. "I was raised thinking my adoptive parents took me in to give me a better life, but I never felt like I belonged. I had strange dreams, always felt out of place. When I grew up, I found a letter in their basement. It said I was born here, in this place, that my mother was a girl taken by force, and my father was someone dangerous. I listened to every word, trying not to let my face show how much it hurt. I knew he was talking about Lisa, the girl David mentioned, the one who came after I escaped. I never met her, but imagining another girl went through the same thing weighed on me heavily. "Did you know her?" he asked. I shook my head slowly. I didn't meet her, but I heard about her, from others. After I got out, I spent years blaming myself for not doing more, for not helping the others who stayed. Andrew sat on a dusty wooden bench, staring at the floor for a moment, before looking up at me. "I don't hate you," he said. "Honestly, I don't know what I feel. Anger at what they did to you. Sadness for everything you went through. But also an emptiness no one's ever filled." I stepped closer and sat beside him carefully. "Andrew, I know you're not to blame for any of this, but I carried so much guilt for so long too, and now I see it wasn't mine, or yours. The guilt belongs to the men who used our silence, who told lies, erased names, and manipulated lives like they were nothing." He nodded. "I just want to understand, to know where I came from, who I am. If there was ever any love in my beginning." That hit me hard, because I knew for him it was all a big shadow, a tangle of stories, papers, and memories that weren't his. I took his hand and said, "Maybe you didn't come from love, but you have the chance to create love, to change what was done before. You don't have to repeat any of it." We sat in silence for a few minutes. The sound of the wind rustling the leaves was all we heard. Then he handed me a folder. "Here's everything I found. Letters, names, photos, dates. There are stories of other girls too. Maybe there's still time to do something with it." I took the folder, feeling its weight like it was more than paper. It was the erased history of so many like me, proof that what I lived through was real, and that someone was finally ready to give it a different ending. "Did you tell William?" he asked. "I did," I replied. "He knows everything now, and he's supporting me." Andrew looked thoughtful. "Do you think he'd be okay meeting me? Not as a brother, but as someone who needs to understand the past, too?" "Yes," I said. "William's a fair man. If he sees this can heal something for you, he'll listen." Andrew stood up. "I don't know what happens next, but thank you for coming, for not running away." I looked around one last time. That barn had been the scene of so much horror, but now it felt like a place of new beginnings. "You didn't run either, Andrew. You saw it through to the end." We said goodbye with an awkward hug, not warm or emotional, but real. Two survivors of a past no one should have lived through. I went home and told William everything. He listened carefully, said he wanted to meet Andrew. Weeks later, they met at a small coffee shop in town. I watched from a distance, from the car. I saw them talking, saw William smile and Andrew lower his head, like he was grateful. In that moment, I felt something heal. But not everything heals so easily, because a few weeks later, another letter arrived. And this one wasn't asking for a conversation. It carried a threat and a name I never should have heard again. Going back to Ohio was like walking through a graveyard with my eyes open. Every mile of the road brought back memories I'd spent decades trying to bury. Andrew drove in silence. William stayed home with the boys, worried, but I insisted I couldn't put this off any longer. Thomas Keller wasn't just a shadow from the past. He was active, watching, and now he was targeting people I love. When we reached the property, the iron gate was open but guarded. 2 security men stopped the car. Andrew said we had an appointment. One of them made a call, and after a few seconds, they let us in. The house was large, modern, but soulless. It felt like a hideout disguised as a mansion. We were led to a room with dark walls and closed windows. Thomas was sitting in a wide armchair, a blanket over his knees. He was old, much older than I'd pictured. Wrinkled skin, small, cold eyes. But there was still arrogance in the way he looked at me. He recognized me instantly. Margaret Collins. I thought you'd be dead by now. I stood tall, and I thought I'd never have to see your face again. Andrew stayed silent. Thomas laughed, coughed, and looked at me like I was an old doll. You caused more trouble than I expected. I thought that house would have erased you completely. I took a deep breath and said what I needed to. You destroyed lives, and you still live like you own everything. But time doesn't forgive. The truth is back. He showed no fear. Instead, he said, the world doesn't want the truth, my dear. It wants silence. That's why no one ever did anything. That's why you were all forgotten. And now you come threatening me with old papers and tears? Andrew stepped forward and placed the folder on the table. We're not here to cry. We're here because we have names, dates, records. And if you do anything to her or her family, this goes public. All of it. Thomas looked at him with disdain. You're the bastard from the barn girl, aren't you? Andrew didn't answer. He just stood there, staring him down. The truth will come out. With or without your permission, I said. And if you think fear still controls me, you're wrong. I was a child once. I'm not anymore. Thomas took a deep breath, looked at the closed window, and muttered, You don't get it, Margaret. It was all allowed. That's how things worked. That house was part of a system. I just did what was always done. My stomach turned. So you admit it. He shrugged. Admit whatever you want. I'm at the end of the line. What are they going to do to me now? Lock up a man in a wheelchair? Andrew was recording everything with a phone in his pocket. Every word, every sentence. You're not at the end of the line, Thomas, he said. You've got a lot to answer for, and this story doesn't die here. When we left the house, I was shaking, but I felt alive. For the first time, I faced one of the men who hurt me and spoke looking him in the eye. I didn't cry. I didn't bow. And that gave me a strength I didn't know I still had. In the days that followed, Andrew gave the audio to an investigative journalist. Within days, Thomas Keller's name was in local papers. The evidence wasn't enough for an arrest, but it was enough to tarnish his image. Investigations were opened, and with that, other women started speaking up. Women from different states, names I hadn't heard in decades, girls who'd been in that same house, others who vanished. Some, sadly, were no longer alive to tell their stories. The pressure grew. Investors in William's company started distancing themselves from Thomas. His assets were frozen. Then, one Sunday morning, we got the news. Thomas Keller was found dead in his home. Heart attack. Alone. No letter, no note. Nothing. Just an old, empty, defeated body. I didn't celebrate. I didn't rejoice. I just sat in silence. I thought about everything he took. Everything he stole, lives, stories, futures. I thought about the girl I was, about Lisa, about the others, and I wondered if this was justice. Maybe it was the most justice the world would allow. Andrew called me that afternoon, said he felt like something had closed, that he could finally breathe. He planned to keep documenting these stories. I told him I'd support him however I could, because despite everything, there are still girls living what I lived. And someone needs to tell their stories. William hugged me when he heard, said he was proud of me, and I cried. But this time, it wasn't from fear. It was relief, because after everything, I was still here, standing, steady, alive. But one thing still bothered me. Something Thomas said in that room kept echoing in my head. He talked about a system, about people who protected it all, about men whose names I never knew. What if he wasn't the last? Thomas's words wouldn't leave me. He didn't say them with anger or defensiveness. He said them like he was stating a truth the world had ignored for too long. He said it was all part of a system. And if that's true, was he really the last? Were there others still out there, watching from the shadows, making sure it all stayed hidden? That question ate at me. So when Andrew called a few days later, saying he needed to show me something urgent, I knew we weren't done. We met at a small coffee shop far from the city center. He arrived looking serious, a laptop under his arm. He sat across from me, opened it, and said, "You need to see this." It was a dossier. Digitized files with names of men directly tied to Thomas. Businessmen, former politicians, doctors, men in high places across the country. Some were still alive, others long gone. But the records were there. Photos, visits to rural properties, names repeated in farm registries. They'd all been to that same place when I was there. Some, after I left. It made my stomach churn. These were men who, to most people, led normal lives, families, prestige. But they were behind a network of abuse, silence, and fear. Andrew looked at me. "Do you recognize any names?" I read slowly. When I got to Martin Wade, my heart stopped. I remembered him. A tall man with gray hair, always in a suit, even in the heat. He came to the farm often, always meeting Richard behind closed doors. Once, he passed me in the hallway, looked at me and said, "Be obedient. It'll be easier that way." Then he kept walking, like I was furniture. Andrew said this man was still alive, living in Colorado, running a foundation for orphans. The irony made me nauseous. "Should we do something?" he asked. "This is too big to keep quiet. If this network still exists, more girls could be suffering." I nodded. "I can't do this alone. Neither can you." We decided to hand everything to the journalist who'd published the story about Thomas. We met with him, gave him the documents and recordings. At first he doubted some connections, but after a week of digging, he confirmed the names, dates, and addresses checked out. A new story was published. Bigger, more serious, with national reach. The accusations exploded. Prominent families went into crisis. Some denied it, others vanished. But the silence was broken, and that couldn't be undone. Slowly, other survivors came forward. Women who'd never shared their stories started sending messages. Some, old like me, said they cried seeing my name. They'd been through something similar. Never knew they had the right to speak, carried the shame alone for decades. Now, they felt they could breathe. I read each message with tears in my eyes. I never imagined my pain could help another woman find strength, and somehow, that gave me peace. A peace I didn't know. Not from revenge or formal justice, but from knowing I finally existed. William hugged me one night and said, "Mom, you've done more for these women than any law ever has." I replied, "I didn't do it alone. It was time. It was courage that grew from pain. It was the love I still managed to save." He smiled, and I felt I'd rebuilt something after all. Andrew kept going with the project. He started an organization offering psychological and legal support for women who'd faced the same violence. He asked me to be the first honorary advisor. I agreed, not because I think I'm important, but because I know how to listen. And sometimes, that's all a woman needs. Someone to hear her without judgment. We held online meetings with other survivors, some in wheelchairs, others with fading memories, but all with one thing in common: the silence forced on them since they were young. Together, we turned that silence into strength, into words, into accusations, into support. For the first time, I didn't feel alone, but something still nagged at me. My own mother never apologized. Carol, the woman who handed me over, who put me in that man's truck and said it was for my own good. I spent my life trying to understand why she did it. And now, with everything coming to light, I wondered if she was part of it, if she knew more than she let on, or if it was just desperation. She's long gone, but she still lives in me, as absence, as doubt. I needed to close that circle, so I decided to visit the house where I grew up with her in Plainfield, the wooden house. It's owned by another family now, but I asked permission to visit. When I walked in, everything felt smaller. The walls, the floor, the window where I used to watch the world. I sat in the corner where I'd play with my brothers. I closed my eyes and said softly, "I forgive you, Mom," even without understanding, even without answers, because holding on to this only ties me to what's gone. That afternoon, as I left, I felt part of the weight stay behind on that floor, and for the first time since I was 12, I felt truly free. The days after that visit were quieter. The world around me seemed to slow down, not because things had changed, but because I had. Going back to my childhood home made me see how much I'd grown with open wounds that never fully closed. But now, they weren't bleeding anymore. They still hurt, but it was a different pain. A pain that reminded me I survived. William drove me back to his house. Emily greeted me with more warmth than usual. She'd always been reserved, but I think she was starting to grasp the depth of what I'd carried. The boys hugged me, asked if I wanted to play cards, and I said yes. For a moment, I let myself just be a grandmother, just be Margaret, without the weight of the past on my shoulders. Andrew kept in touch almost daily. The organization was doing well. Other survivors started recording videos sharing their stories. The press covered the cases with respect. For the first time, women like me had a space to exist, to speak, to not be called liars or overdramatic. I watched it all with pride, but from a distance. My role was done. I'd opened a door. Now other voices were stepping through. And that was beautiful. William started calling me my hero. I told him to stop, because deep down, I didn't see myself that way. I just wanted a normal life, a normal childhood, a start that wasn't marked by pain. But since I couldn't choose that, I did something with what was left. I survived, and I gave meaning to what seemed meaningless. I got a letter from a woman named Abigail, 81, from Texas. She wrote in shaky handwriting on yellowed paper, saying she'd been sold at 14 too. Got pregnant by a man twice her age, had a daughter and was separated from her right after birth, spent 60 years believing her daughter was dead. But after seeing my name in the news, she started searching, and she found her. Now they talk every Sunday. Abigail wrote, "I thought I'd die alone and forgotten, but you gave me the courage to try again. Thank you for not staying silent." When I finished reading, I cried. But it wasn't sadness, it was gratitude, for living long enough to see this happen, for not leaving before seeing the good my story did. I kept the letter in a wooden box with others I'd received, my little collection of proof that speaking up matters. At the end of September, we held an in-person meeting with some of the women from the organization. It was in a simple community center in rural Illinois. Folding chairs, a coffee table, cookies, plastic flowers. Nothing fancy. But what was there was precious. Truth. Every woman who walked into that room had a story the world tried to bury, but now, they were there, sitting side by side, laughing, crying, remembering. I felt like I was among sisters. When it was my turn to speak, I stood slowly, walked to the center of the room and faced them. I said, "Thank you for not giving up on existing," and they all clapped. It was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. On the way home, William looked at me and said, "You changed so many people's stories, you know?" I replied, "I just told mine." The rest followed. He smiled, because it was true. That night, I sat alone on the porch. The sky was clear, full of stars. I thought about the girl I was, the one clutching a rag doll in a stranger's truck, not knowing her life would never be the same. I closed my eyes and pictured her sitting beside me. I said to her, "We made it this far, and you were stronger than you knew." Now, as I write these words, I know my time is running out. I don't know if I have months or just days, but it doesn't matter, because what I needed to say, I said. What I needed to face, I faced. And what I feared most is gone. Today, I live in peace, with the certainty that silence didn't win. If this story touched you in any way, if you know someone who needs to hear it, share it. Subscribe to the channel to follow other stories like mine. And if you want, leave a comment saying where you're listening from. It'll be a comfort to know these words reached you. My name is Margaret Collins. I was sold at 12, but I wasn't destroyed. And now, finally, I'm free.